Hiya Monstaz! After a long journey through the 4th dimension and battling a 3-headed beaver, I found my way back to you monsters. I also made my way through a freak show and found the freak of them all. Monsters, put your claws together and let's welcome Fearagen. Tonight we have 5 more funeral home stories to share with you guys. And with Fearagen's help, we were able to slip in a bonus story just for you monsters. So, hold on to your teddy and let the stories begin.
The death effect. Some people often ask me about the psychological toll that a job like this has on an individual. Seeing death every day and dealing with it on such an extreme level seems unbearable to many people. I believe that it depends on who you are and what your personality is like, and perhaps even what your belief system is in the afterlife. As for me, dealing with death daily was never something that bothered me. I found it intriguing mostly, and it was an adventure of sorts. I have a strong belief in God and in Christianity, which helped me deal with it differently than some of my colleagues who believed differently. There were some nights at first when I would come home and lay in bed, replaying the images that I had seen that day, but it never bothered me. For many people, I don't think they could have handled this type of job. I'm not entirely sure why I was able to handle it and why I was so intrigued. Then again, there were many jobs, such as surgeons and doctors, that I could never do. The mere sight of someone in pain makes me queasy, but the dead, they don't have an effect on me.
Corpse hoist. One of the tasks of the removal team staff where I worked was to place the deceased in their casket after the embalming had been completed. Once the body was laid in the casket, then the cosmetic work could begin with dressing, fixing the hair, and adding makeup. Now, there were 2 ways to get the body in the casket. The first and most obvious was to have 2 staff members lift the body steadily and gently lay them down. Maneuvering the dead weight over the edge of the casket and setting them down into it was no easy feat, and often resulted in the staff person getting face to face with a corpse as they bent over to lay them down. Not necessarily a pleasant job, but there was another method. We had, attached to the ceiling, a machine that included a series of pulleys and straps. A body could simply be rolled up under the machine and the straps to run under the body. Think of the straps like large leather belts. With a push of the button, the straps would ascend upward, hoisting the body into the air. While suspended in the air, the casket could be rolled under, and then the body could be lowered gently into the casket. The machine was not fast, but it would hoist even the fattest person you could imagine. In fact, this was often the reason to use the hoisting machine. Or if there was only one staff person working and needed to get the body loaded into a casket, the hoist machine enabled them to do so with ease. When a family attends a funeral or a viewing, the last thing on their mind is, how do they get the body in the casket? Well, hopefully this sheds some light on this question.
Children. Little 2-year-old Sean had opened the back door to the house leading to the family pool. He was babysat by a relative who thought he had gone to sleep in his room for a nap on that summer's afternoon. Sean made his way to the pool and fell in. Only a short time later, his babysitter saw the back door open and ran outside to discover Sean floating face down in the water. The medical examiner's office was about an hour away since it was in a neighboring city. I loaded myself in the van and set out for the drive, knowing I had a 2-year-old drowning victim to pick up. I arrived at the ME and went about my normal checklist of things to do. Fill out the body bag and place it on the body, check the body for personal effects and log them on my paperwork. I unzipped the body bag and the first thing I noticed was the young boy's wet Superman underwear that he had been wearing. The sight of this really made the story of his death more clear to me. The next thing I noticed were his eyes, or in this case, his lack of eyes. The ME had removed the boy's eyes from his sockets. His family had agreed to donate them. The little boy, cold from death, with empty eye sockets and wet, soiled clothes next to his body was perhaps one of the most impacting images I had ever seen. I loaded him to the back of the van and began to drive back to the funeral home. All the way there I rode in silence as I reflected the day's events. I thought about his family who had been in hysterics. I thought of his life, cut short because of normal toddler curiosity. I thought about his eyes now, perhaps being used for someone else's benefit. It was perhaps the most difficult day I had in my short funeral home career. The next day, I was required to dress the boy in his funeral clothes, a tiny white tuxedo. I placed him in his tiny white casket and prepared him for viewing. The embalmer made sure his eyes were closed in such a way that his eyes looked like they were still there. The image of him in the casket was not nearly as difficult as the image of him on the ME gurney when I first saw him. His wet clothes were placed in a small red plastic bag and given back to the family. I can only imagine what they must have been thinking and going through when they opened that bag. Would they throw them away, wash them, or put them in the drawer? Who knows?
Expiration date. I had been surprised to meet a man who had been dead for several months and was still resting on a gurney in a prep room at a funeral home. He was wearing a nice suit, tie, and polished shoes. The man had been embalmed, but was not looking good at all. I asked a coworker, "What is the deal with that guy?" They told me something had occurred with the family and their finances, which had kept them from being able to proceed with the funeral arrangements. And until paperwork could be resolved, he was to remain in the prep room until further notice. Now, I'm not sure if I was being told the truth, but I do remember him being in his little corner of the room for quite some time. So maybe there was some truth to the story? Well, who knows? Now, which begs the question, is there a legal time limit or expiration date on the deceased? Are funeral homes required to dispose of remains after a certain amount of time? I'm not sure what the answer to that is. Perhaps some of our more experienced funeral directors and technicians know. Yet I am quite surprised on how few rules there are to the deceased in terms of the family's involvement and the ability to make choices about the arrangements and details of their loved ones who have passed away. There is no law that says you cannot view the body at any time you are ready. There is no law that says that funerals, viewings, and burials have to be done the way the funeral homes say. There really are no rules as to how funerals must be conducted. You just have to find a funeral home that is able to accommodate your requests. Funeral homes will give you some guidelines to follow, and in most cases, this is extremely helpful to the grieving. Sometimes funeral directors will make it seem that it is a law that the funeral go exactly the way they tell you it must. This is just not true. So, don't be afraid to ask your funeral director to accommodate you and your family's wishes. It really should be their obligation to accommodate your wishes.
Purging. I'll never forget the first time I heard one of my colleagues mention the word purge. Purging is the phenomenon when someone's bowels release either air or fluid through the mouth, nose, or other openings in the body. It can occur on a freshly dead body or a body that's already been embalmed. In moving dead bodies around to get them on the gurney for transport, I would often push too hard on the abdomen, causing the body to purge. Not only is this just generally disgusting, but it can also be dangerous since we never know what diseases a person may have had. When purging occurred, I had to make sure that I did not breathe the air, or if there was any type of fluid, it needed to be cleaned up promptly. Luckily, I was always wearing rubber gloves when handling dead bodies, which came in handy when dealing with purgers. We assume that dead bodies are completely dead, but in fact, the body still has chemicals, air, and fluids actively settling down after death. Purging was always something that I was aware of, and I tried not to cause it if possible. Some bodies would continue to purge even after embalming. This usually was embalming fluid seeping out of the mouth, nose, and eyes, or even through the skin. For family viewings, this type of purging always had to be monitored and discreetly cleaned without the family seeing the problem.
Shot in the face. A taxi driver had been shot point blank in the face. He had picked up a customer, driven them around town, and had turned his head to face them sitting in the back seat when they shot him. They only wanted to steal what little money he had collected that night. The story was all over the news. People were outraged, though everyone knew that these were the dangers of being a taxi driver in a large metropolitan city. The saddest part of the story was that the man had recently taken this as a second job to earn some extra money to support his family of a wife and a 9-year-old daughter. They had fallen on hard times, and he was willing to do anything it took to earn enough money so they could make ends meet. Little did he know that the night job would cost him his life. I picked him up at the medical examiner's office several days after the shooting. An exhausting investigation had taken place. A full autopsy had occurred and his face looked frightful. The gun, which had gone off at close range, had shattered his face, leaving it looking deformed. Upon looking at the photo of the man in life, I could not recognize his face in death. The body bag zipper was stained with blood trying to seep out. It was a mess, to say the least. I unzipped the bag and placed an ID tag on his ankle and zipped him back up. I arrived at the funeral home in the afternoon. He was a large man, not fat, but big-boned, tall and heavy. The picture provided to the prep room was one of him with his 9-year-old daughter. How sad that he had been struck down so early in life. I could only imagine the grief his family had been going through. The embalmer, Chad, immediately wanted him placed on the table so he could begin the process of trying to restore his face for the funeral viewing. Upon looking at the situation, Chad concluded that he would be unable to restore the man's face to a recognizable state. This was odd since Chad prided himself of being an artist who would work miracles on even the most mangled corpses. The problem was the excess of bruising and swelling that had taken place on the man's face. Also, too much tissue had been destroyed when the bullet entered. It was not just a simple bullet hole, but rather a large mangling of the face. Chad picked up the phone and called the funeral director. He told him that the body was in way too bad of shape and that he did not feel it could be restored for viewing. The funeral director said he'd like to come and take a look before any decisions were made about closing the casket. He knew that he would have to be the one to tell the family that they should consider a closed casket. It was a fact in life, but a hard conversation to have with a family in grieving. The funeral director showed up a few minutes later. He took one look at the corpse and agreed the casket would have to remain closed. The family would not be able to see their husband and father one last time. Well, now, technically, this was not true since the family has full rights to make any decision they want. The funeral director can suggest anything, and usually the families agree. In this case, the family said they wanted the casket open so that everyone could see what a horrific crime had taken place. It was a statement of some sort to show the world that this crime had happened and that something should be done about it. The funeral director was not thrilled with their decision, but it was their decision to make, not his. His job was to carry out their wishes no matter what, as long, of course, it was legal. So, after the body had been cleaned and prepared, I dressed him in his suit, being careful not to disturb his mangled face. In this case, his hair did not need to be fixed. A bad hair day was the least of his worries at this point. I placed him in his casket using the body lift machine. This is a machine with straps that enables a body to be hoisted into the air just above the casket and then lowered in. As I rolled the casket into place, I could only imagine the family's horrified expressions as they viewed the body. My supervisor asked me to stand in the room and make sure that the situation did not get out of hand and close the casket should the family request it. I normally did not have any contact with families during a funeral service or viewing, but this was an exception. Surprisingly, the family did not react the way that I thought they would. I assumed crying and gnashing of teeth would be involved. They quietly viewed the body, made a few comments, and went about their way visiting with others who had come to pay their respects. I was surprised, but relieved. The situation taught me that sometimes it's best to simply let the grieving family decide what they want. Sometimes we know what's best for us, and a funeral director does not. Sometimes our instincts lead us in the right way. Now, I am convinced that leaving the taxi cab driver's casket open for all the world to see the horrific sight was the best therapy that could have been given for the grief-stricken family. Monstaz, I hope you enjoy the stories. And Monstaz, be sure to check out Fearagen's channel. This is if you really want to have a reason to stay up freaked out for the night. Just click up there to teleport to his channel. Also, be sure to hit that like button, leave some comments below, and if you haven't done so, be sure to subscribe and become a monster today. Thank you so much again, Monstaz, for watching the video. And thank you, Fearagen, for collaborating on these stories. Big shouts to you and the Freak Show. And like always, Monstaz, till next time.